Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. So today's topic is a very interesting one on SIEM best practices and use cases. But before we get started, I just want to make sure that everything is okay with the webinar setup. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear, and I hope you have no issues with viewing my shared screen. So you should be able to see the title deck of my slides that says SIEM best practices and use cases. Right. So in case you have any difficulties with the webinar setup or any questions that you have over the course of the webinar, please reach out to us on the live chat option that you see on the GoToWebinar panel so that you can engage in a conversation with us. Right. So my name is Siddharth Sharad Kumar, or just Sid, if that's easier to pronounce. And I work in Log360, which is ManageEngine SIEM solution, as a product specialist and evangelist. Right. So I do a lot of presentations about SIEM, about certain trends in the market and other developments in the SIEM field at events around the globe, and I also present webinars such as these. Right, so a lot of the content that you're going to see in today's presentation is based on certain trends that I've observed over the past few years, and also some of the cases that I'm going to discuss in terms of best practices and use cases are again things that I have been seeing when I interact with our clients and customers, right? So a lot of the agenda for today's webinar is very practical and action oriented so that you'll have some information that you can take back and try to implement in your organization. Right, so this is the agenda. We're going to be talking about, when I say best practices and use cases, it essentially boils down to a lot of examples and a lot of examples that you can actually think about, and sort of question whether you are doing the things that we are discussing. We're going to look at very specific use cases and specific cases of SIEM, like for Active Directory, for certain more advanced analytics such as UEBA and things like that. And at every point, I'm going to give you examples and practical action items that you can actually take back and utilize. Right. So we look at the main areas that we're going to be looking at is reporting. Right, we're going to look at what kinds of security reports you need. We're going to look at, in general, what kind of security events you need to track in your network. We're going to look at two important analytical techniques, one being event correlation and the other being machine learning. Right, so this is what the agenda is all about, in terms of when we talk about SIEM, what are the problems that we are trying to solve? And I'm going to highlight a few specific examples, not to say that these are the most important examples, but these are examples that I have dealt with personally, and these are cases that I have discussed with at events around the globe. So hopefully the information that you receive might make you ponder about certain things, and hopefully you can engage in a conversation with us on the live chat to really maximize the learning opportunity. Right, so I'm not going to spend time telling you what to expect, but let's just jump right into it with the material and get started with today's webinar. Right, so I just wanted to let you know that we have ManageEngine Lock 360, which is a SIEM solution. This is not going to be a product-specific webinar. It's going to be a knowledge share about SIEM use cases and best practices. But I wanted to let you know upfront that ManageEngine has a SIEM offering called Log 360, which essentially integrates two of our most popular auditing tools, Event Log Analyzer and AD Audit Plus. And these two tools come together to give you Log 360, right? So over the course of the webinar, maybe for just a minute, I've planned to show a demo to illustrate a particular case that we'll be looking at. So only at that point will I actually jump into the Event Log Analyzer module. But apart from that, I'm not really going to be talking about the product. So if you want more details about the product at any time, just reach out to us on the live chat, and our tech support engineers will answer you those questions. Right. So what we're going to look at is actual cases, and whatever we deal with, you can take it for granted that Log 360 will anyway address those areas. Right, so let's get started. A lot of you attending today's webinar might be security administrators, maybe some of you might even be CIOs and other senior level security professionals. And the reason why you may be here for today's webinar is that maybe you are evaluating a SIM solution in the market. Maybe you are trying to revamp or enhance your current SIM solution that you've already deployed. Or maybe you're just here to learn more about certain trends and basically what are the other people around us doing in the world of SIM so that we can look at our own organizations and decide whether we are missing something or not, right? So when we talk about SIM, I want to start off with this simple example of a security incident that may well happen in any one of your organizations, right? So you can see that Ron is an end user from the sales team, and Ron is added to the domain admins group in Active Directory, right? And is this a problem? Of course it's a problem, right? Because this could be a potential privilege escalation, and this could potentially jeopardize your security policy, right? So for a lot of you, a situation like this, if it's not corrected, you may be looking at violations to your compliance policies, right? I'm sure you all agree with me. I've picked up a very simple example to get the ball rolling, but this is a thing that we all can relate to and we all are concerned about, right? Because this would be an unwarranted escalation of privileges for one of your regular end users. And if something like this happens in your organizations, you must be in a position to detect it, right? So I'm sure you all agree with me on this. This is bad. And if this happens in your organization, you need to be notified so that you can then investigate and resolve this issue, right? Now, a lot of organizations, and we've noticed this, me and my colleagues who present at conferences around the globe, in fact, at ManageEngine, we did about 50 odd conferences around the world last year, right from the United States to Europe to Australia. And a lot of the administrators that we spoke to, and we interacted with thousands of administrators around the world, a lot of the administrators are struggling to stay on top of situations like these, right? And maybe some of you tuning in today are also concerned about the situation, but are not in a position to address it in your organization, right? Because this is a situation where you need to be notified immediately, right? If someone is added to domain admins in Active Directory, you need to be notified instantly. Now, you need to have a process, a mechanism of auditing set up to be able to detect it. But the problem really is that organizations are struggling to detect such situations, right? And I want to show you this one statistic from Verizon's 2018 Data Breach Investigations Report. In fact, the 2019 Data Breach Investigations Report was published recently. And I'm in the process of reading it, actually. And I strongly recommend any serious security professional out there to look it up. But the stat here was from last year, and it said that 68% of breaches that Verizon investigated had taken months or longer to discover, right? 68% is approximately 2 in 3 breaches that Verizon investigated had taken months to be discovered. Right? And that is horrifying, because imagine now the previous situation that we saw where Ron was added to domain admins and his privileges were escalated. That could potentially have resulted in a data breach, and such security incidents or data breaches are taking way too long for organizations to realize that they have happened. Right? Organizations simply aren't knowing that a data breach has happened in their own network, and they find out months after the breach happened. And the reason is because they are not able to track situations like the one that we just saw. They're not able to know when certain misuse events happen in their network, right? It could be a privilege escalation, it could be a SQL injection, it could be anything, but organizations are struggling to find out then and there that something wrong is happening. Right? So and the reason is because security teams lack the analytical techniques needed to spot what we call the needle in the haystack, right? Because one single event here of Ron getting added to domain admins, thousands of these things are happening every minute or every hour in your organization. And it's very difficult to find out that one bad event or a one event of interest in a sea of lot of say junk events, right? So, and this problem is getting more and more difficult because networks are getting more complex. Attack techniques are getting more sophisticated, right? We are not dealing with such a simple situation of an end user getting added to domain admins, right? Attack patterns can be a lot more elaborate. And the problem is only getting tougher. It's been getting worse, and the problem at hand is only worsening with networks getting more complicated, users moving to the cloud, and you having a lot of advanced attacks and zero-day exploits that are surfacing. Right. Now, the good news is situations like this can be detected, right? It's not impossible. And to give you the first key takeaway for today's presentation, this is directly linking to the example that we saw of an end user being added to a top level group in Active Directory. You can actually track such situations, right? This is why we have logs, so that we know what's going on. And by analyzing logs, you'll be able to detect certain events of interest that could potentially result in a security incident or worse, a data breach, right? So this is, if you're in the context of Active Directory, and I wanted to give this example because a lot of you, of course, deal with Active Directory. And this example that we just saw earlier is something that we all can relate to. Now, in your Windows security log, there are 3 crucial event IDs pertaining to changes to group membership, right? 4728, 4732, and 4756. Now, these 3 event IDs get logged when a member is added to a security-enabled global group, local group, and universal group, respectively, right? So these are 3 event IDs that get triggered when these scenarios happen. And if you set up an alerting criteria where you say that if any of these event IDs get triggered and the group in concern is either administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, or schema admins, right, or any other top level group that you may have, right? Some of them could be custom application groups that you have defined in Active Directory. Now, if any of these groups are the group name equals any of these groups and any of these event IDs are triggered, you would want an alert notification, right? Because if you've set up that alert criteria, you're essentially tracking such escalations of privileges, right? So this is a simple example, but a lot of the time organizations seem to lack, either they know that they need to get alerts, but they don't know what to track, or they know what to track and they don't have the appropriate auditing and analytical tools to track the events of interest, right? So if you are using a SIEM solution, make sure that this particular case, a very crucial case with regards to Active Directory, is something that you have set up for in terms of reporting and alerting, and you're tracking this, right? I've given you this one simple example, but really the same idea extends to the rest of your network as well, right? In Active Directory, you may have cases of privilege escalations and other kinds of threats that you'll have to deal with and set up these mechanisms to track such scenarios. But the same process extends to the rest of your network as well, right? And the process is that you first define an audit policy to track certain important events. I will give you a list of certain events that you must track, so to speak, certain common events of interest that all of us are concerned about. Even though our IT environments are so different, there are certain kinds of events that are common to all of us, right? So I'm going to show that to you in just a minute or two. And once you've defined these audit policies and you're bringing in the logs that are important to you, you're collecting all these logs into a central location, your SIEM solution then can report, right? It can report on the data that it has collected so that you can visualize what's going on in a nice graphical human readable format. And the data is also archived, which is important from a forensic investigation point of view and also from a compliance point of view. But more importantly than just the reports, the SIEM solution can bring in a lot of analytical techniques such as event correlation to trigger alerts for potential threats. Right? So an example of what we saw in Active Directory of an end user getting his privileges escalated, that is something that a SIEM solution can trigger an alert for you, right? So that you can quickly respond. Now, this is the process that we're looking at, and and the first step, as you can see, is to define an audit policy and collect the logs. So let's go through this entire process, and at each point, I'll just give you a few examples, a few best practices, a few use cases that you can make a note of so that when you deploy your SIEM solution, you can make sure certain basic cases are being tracked. Right, so let's get started with what are my log sources. Now, each of you might have various different log sources in your IT environment, but the list that I have put out here are a common list of log sources that we see our clients dealing with, right? So you have your domain controllers, you may have a lot of critical servers, which might be either Windows or Unix servers. All of your end users may have workstations, you have databases, web servers, and other business critical applications. You have your network devices, which could be firewalls, routers, switches, IDS, IPS. Some of you might have some next-gen firewalls, built-in IDS, IPS, and things like that. You might have other security solutions and threat solutions, which are also log sources. And you have your cloud infrastructure, right? You might be running on AWS or on Azure. You might have cloud applications such as Office 365, Salesforce. All of these are potential log sources, right? And there are some miscellaneous log sources. You may have some network monitoring tools, vulnerability scanners, maybe some PAM solutions and things like that, right? So log sources effectively is any any entity in your network that is capable of generating event information, right? So in an ideal situation, you should be able to bring in as much log data as possible from all your different sources into your SIEM solution so that it can apply its analytical techniques on the data. Of course, a lot of you might have constraints, you might have bandwidth related issues, you may have cost related issues, right? You might not be able to afford licensing for too many log sources or too much data, right? So, but make sure that at the bare minimum, you are getting your logs from your most important assets, right? These are typically your domain controllers, your network devices like your firewalls, databases, your web servers. Those are probably, I would say, I would recommend you to bring in logs from everything, including workstations, because a lot of important events get logged only on the workstation, and a lot of attacks start on the workstation, which is why their logs are important. But on a fundamental level, if you're just getting started with SIEM and you're just deploying a SIEM solution for the first time, or you're at a lower maturity stage, try to bring in the logs first from your domain controllers, network devices, databases, and web servers, right? Start off with these and then work yourself up to other critical servers, workstations, your cloud applications, etc. Right. Now, these are the log sources. So this is where you need to bring your logs from. As far as the exact log sources that you're looking at, that depends on your requirements. But this is typically, I'm sure you all agree with me. I got a couple of chat messages saying that, couple of the attendees today saying that, yeah, these are what we are also looking at in our environment, right? So this is not a secret information that I'm sharing because all of you would have these bullet points in your IT as well, right? So these are the log sources. Now, what are the events that we need to track? Right? We know that, okay, we need logs from all of these things, domain controllers, workstations, this and that. Now, what are the events that we need to bring in from the from these log sources, right? Because as you know, logging is something that needs to be configured, right? Logging is not something that is enabled by default on most systems, at least. I could be wrong. Maybe it's certain specific applications log by default. So please correct me if you know certain systems that where logging is automatically enabled, right? But if you take, for example, your domain controllers or your Windows environment, logging is something that you need to define by means of an audit policy, right? You have to go as an administrator and define an audit policy to say that these and these events need to be tracked, right? Logs need to be generated for these and these events. Now, I don't want to go specifically into system by system and open up Windows local group policy, open up a Cisco infrastructure and open the syslog policy and go specific for each device. But I want to list out, generally speaking, what kinds of events should you track, right? This is more a general list of events that you need to be tracking, and depending on the exact specific environments that you're looking for, you would have to go to the respective audit policy setting and enable logging for the specific events. Right? Sorry if that sentence sounded very confusing, but what I meant to say was that what you see on this screen are typically the kinds of events that you want to be tracking, right? As simple as that. You need to be looking at log on, log off events on your different systems. This could be your Windows servers, it could be your databases, it could be any other network device or application. But you need to essentially know who is logging on to your different systems and applications, right? You need to track the logons and log offs. And you need to track both successful logons and failed logons. Right? So for example, if you're taking a particular system, you need to know who all logged into that system for a given time frame. And if you take any user, you need to know which all systems they logged on to. Right? So it's a two-way thing. For every user, you need to know which all systems they are logging into. And for every system, every server, you need to know who all logged into that system. Right? And you need to track log offs as well. Right? When do they log on and when do they log off? So this is what we call an audit trail, and this is something that you need to maintain. Next is Active Directory changes, right? Changes happening in your Active Directory. For example, a change made to a user, computer, OU, group, GPO, all of these changes need to be tracked, right? What I mean to say by this is that logs for any Active Directory change is something that you need to be tracking. So the example that we saw in the first, I keep coming back to that, of an end user getting added to domain admins in Active Directory, that is something that obviously you need to be logging so that you can detect that situation, right? And changes in general are very crucial, right? Changes in general are crucial because a particular change can potentially jeopardize the security of your infrastructure, right? So just like Active Directory changes must be tracked, your network configuration changes, right? Changes made to your router setting, your firewall settings, all of that must be logged and tracked. Firewall traffic, that is again important. Who is coming into your network, who is going out, what is the traffic that your firewall is allowing and denying. This is something that you need to get logs for those events as well. And then you have system events, right? Because most attacks inevitably will have a system event. This could be an installation of a software, installation of a service, maybe a system shutdown, a system restart, a launch of a new process. All of these things might happen when attacks, malware such as ransomware, get launched in your network, right? Some system events might be triggered. So you obviously need to be tracking the system events that are happening in your network. And then you have data accesses and modifications, right? Who is accessing and modifying your data? And this is where we talk about the 4 vital W's, the who, when, which, and the what, right? So these are things that you need to be tracking. You need to know who is accessing your data, which piece of data was accessed, when was the access made, and in case a change was made to the data, what was the change value, right? The who, when, which, and the what. And then So really what I'm giving you here is just simple common examples of, I'm just saying, if you are getting started with SIM and you're wondering, okay, what are the events that I need to be getting in my SIM solution? What are the events I need to be running reports and triggering alerts for? These are a good starting point, is what I would say, right? Administrator actions. What are the actions being performed by your different administrators? Maybe they're changing a GPO, maybe they are editing some database rule, anything, right? Different administrators on all your different systems. You need to be tracking their actions, and you need to have the entire audit trail for all the actions that they have performed, right? So that you can audit it and check and validate that those actions were legit and not compromising security, right? I just given one more specific example of web server errors, right? So the different errors, HTTP status codes that get logged by your web server, right? You might see 200 errors, 300 errors, 400 errors. So these things need to be tracked as well. Just gave one. So really, I'm not giving you like a comprehensive list here by any means, but it's a good starting point, right? Because the previous slide we saw what are the log sources, and it was basically typically what are the log sources that I see our clients deal with. And when I say what events we should be tracked, I'm again saying, okay, typically our clients are looking at tracking these things. And you may agree with me on this, right? So a SIM solution such as ManageEngine Lock 360 at a very basic level is able to do all of these things, right? You're able to track all of the logons, AD changes, firewall traffic, system events, data accesses, and etc. So this is just a simple example. Now, these are typically achieved by running reports, right? So if you want to track and know, say for the last 24 hours, all the Active Directory changes that have happened, you can run a report using a SIM solution such as Log360, right? And a lot of SIM solutions such as ours will give you these as out-of-the-box reports, meaning these are built into the solution so that for an administrator, they don't need to go and worry about parsing these individual logs, but they can just run the report because the solution has built-in rules. They can just run a report for, say, all failed logons in the last 1 week on a particular server. And they'll be able to get that in a neat chart with a drill down possibility, right? So this is typically the events that you've seen here are general events that we need to track, and these typically are achieved by running reports. Now, you need to also set up alerts for certain kinds of events called indicators of compromise, or IoCs. IoCs are essentially events that could potentially signify that a security incident is underway in your network, right? So you need to configure alerting rules and correlation rules to track certain kinds of what I'd like to call misuse or bad events, right? So like privilege escalations, the example that we saw, or multiple failed logons or access attempts, right? What if you have suddenly 20 failed logons on one of your server, right? So that could signify that could be an indicator of compromise, that okay, maybe something suspicious is up. So you need to set up alerts for situations like these. Firewall policy changes. What if someone goes and changes a firewall policy? Installation of software or services, right? I'm sure all of you would agree with me that you very rarely install a new software on one of your critical servers, right? That's just something that that doesn't happen, right? We don't, on a given date, you don't go and just install a new service on one of your critical servers, which means that if someone installs a new service on a critical server, chances are that that service is malicious or someone is up to no good, right? So this is again something that I'd like to think of as unusual event, right? In normal, these indicators of compromise are things that usually don't happen, right? When we saw the previous slide, events like logon events, Active Directory changes, those all those kinds of events all happen throughout the day, and we can just review it and check that everything is okay. But a subset of some of those events could be a cause of concern, right? So what I mean to say that is generally speaking, log on, log off events can just be reviewed. But if you have multiple failed logons or an unusual logon at an unusual hour, you need to be alerted, right? So you periodically review events using reports, but you need alerts for when things go wrong, right? When things go wrong, you can't wait to review it in a report, but you need an alert triggered immediately. So this is what I've listed out here as few 5 or 6 examples of alerts that you may need, right? Known attacks such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, distributed denial of service. These are all attack patterns that we know. So those patterns need to be configured as alerting rules so that they can be tracked by your SIEM solution. And general anomalous events, right? Any anomalies that happen, you need alerts for that as well. Right. I'm not going to give you, I don't want to just bore you with only theory. So I don't want to just bore you on theory. So I thought I'll give you a simple example of an alerting scenario, right? So I just jump into Event Log Analyzer as I promised earlier. I just want to jump into the tool to show you what do I mean by security alert, and what exactly can the product, not just our product, but any SIEM solution or any good SIEM solution can alert you for, right? So I'm not going to jump over and show you all of the reports and things like that. But what I want to show you is how the correlation engine of the product can trigger an alert for a particular suspicious event, right? So I have some simulated data here that I want to show you for the installation of a software or a service on one of my critical servers, right? So the product has raised an alert here, and you can see the event timeline, that is the pattern of events that resulted in the alert being triggered by the product, right? So I want to just show you this. At 17:48, at 5:48 p.m., you can see that there was a Windows fail logon, right? And this continues to happen for a few times until 17:49, where a Windows account successfully logs on, right? So in that 1 minute, there were a lot of failed logons and then a successful logon, which is sort of like a brute force kind of activity, right? So keep that in mind. And then at 17:50, that is another 1.5 minutes later, a service was installed on the Windows server. And then about another, at 17:51, again, about 30-40 seconds later, this service was started, right? So the product's intelligence is able to combine or correlate all of these different individual events, and it's able to throw a very precise alert at 17:51, right? That you can see here at 17:51, that says that this particular pattern of events happened, and it's a potential installation of a suspicious service on the server, right? So this is possible only if you're tracking failed and successful logons and tracking system events such as installation of services, right? So that is why I wanted to show you this example, because we saw in the previous few slides, we saw what are the kinds of events we need to track. And over here, I told you things like log on, log off events and system events. And I spoke about setting up alerts for indicators of compromise, such as installations of suspicious software, right? So only if you're tracking these individual events can the product's analytics, the analytical capabilities trigger alerts for more complex attack patterns, right? So only if you're tracking successful logons and failed logons can a correlation engine then correlate those two events and associate them to discover something that might have been missed, right? So that is the simple idea of event correlation, where you're able to associate each of these individual events, and very powerful it becomes, right? When you look at what events should be tracked, and I gave you all of these examples. Imagine having a correlation engine that can automatically associate all of these different events and then throw you alerts, right? So you just have to sit back once you've fed this information into the tool. You just have to sit back and wait for the correlation engine to, of course, you have to configure some basic rules, but then you sit back and wait for the correlation engine to spot these patterns and raise alarms, right? So this is event correlation, a very powerful technology which has been around for many years, and it can help defeat a lot of attacks that are out there. So the example that I showed you on Event Log Analyzer, where you could see how an entire pattern of events was being tracked, that is possible because of the product's intelligent correlation engine. Now, correlation, as you noticed, is very specific. Right? Correlation is very specific in the sense that it tracks a very specific attack pattern. But I also said that you need alerts for anomalies, right? Because anomalous events themselves signify that some suspicious activity is going on, right? An anomalous event could potentially mean that a security incident is underway in your organization, right? Because anomaly means not normal, right? So something that is out of the normal is what you would expect to happen during a breach. So for that, we have a technology called UEBA that has been getting more and more popular over the last couple of years. It's been around for not too long, at least not officially known as UEBA. And a lot of SIEM vendors, including ManageEngine, have built in UEBA functionality into their SIEM solutions. Right? So UEBA stands for User and Entity Behavior Analytics, and it goes hand in hand with SIEM. It sort of augments the capabilities of SIEM. Right? So UEBA uses machine learning and statistical analytical techniques to apply these machine learning algorithms on the SIEM data to profile the behaviors of users and systems in a network to define what we call a security baseline. Right? So the machine learning works on your SIEM solutions data to find out what is normal and what is abnormal in your network. And when things go wrong, if something anomalous happens, the UEBA module is able to raise an alarm, right, for the deviation from the security baseline. So UEBA basically has what we call a training period. If any of you are familiar with how machine learning works, there's a training period during which time the UEBA module is able to profile the network and identify what typically happens, what happens typically on a given day, right? So maybe these many log-on events happen. Maybe this particular user logs in from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Maybe they access server ABC. It could be anything, right? So each user and entity in your network is very unique, and each of them behave differently on a given day. So by leveraging machine learning, you are able to identify each and every user and system's normal behavior so that when something out of the ordinary happens, an alarm can be raised, right? So so how UEBA works is that it defines what is known as a risk score for every user and system, and it keeps increasing the risk score as and when anomalies happen, right? So if an anomalous event happens for a particular user, the UEBA module increases the risk score associated with that user, and it becomes very easy for the administrator to visualize the risk and track and measure the incident. Right? So risk scores are just simply a way for us to visualize dangers in our network. Right? So rather than the traditional way of just looking at reports and charts and waiting for alarms, by using risk scores, we can do a sort of live tracking of a security incident by just observing how the risk scores of each user and entity change. Right? So like I said, every user and system has a risk score assigned, which keeps fluctuating depending on any anomalies that they trigger. Right? Let me give you a simple example. Right? So of course, like the last bullet point in the slide says, deviations from expected behavior result in the increase of the concerned users or entity's risk score. Right? So that's the idea. If something, if a user's behavior deviates from their normal behavior, their risk score will increase. Let's look at a simple example before finishing up the webinar. Right? So this is a simple example of how UEBA can help detect and mitigate insider threats and data exfiltration. Right. So this is a simple example here. The story goes, an engineer is informed that his contract is not being renewed. Right. So there's an engineer in your organization who's being told that, hey, we're not renewing your contract and you're being let go. Now at 9 p.m. on a given day, on that day, he goes and accesses design specifications on your server. Right. This is a little suspicious, right? Because maybe this engineer normally works from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but he's going and accessing some data at 9 p.m. in the night. I'm not saying it's an attack here because maybe that day he had to work late, but it's a little suspicious, don't you think? And here is where a UEBA module, so Log360's UEBA module, will be able to record this as a time anomaly because the user normally works at earlier hours, but he's doing some activity late at night at 9 p.m. So now there's a bit of a risk that maybe there is an insider threat, but you don't know. Now then at 9:30 p.m., Steve, and Steve is the name of this engineer, reads multiple documents and he modifies multiple documents on the server. Right now it's getting more suspicious because, okay, at 9 p.m. you could have just said, okay, maybe he's just working late today. But at 9:30 p.m., now he's copying a lot of data. He's reading a lot of data and he's then modifying a lot of documents. And there is an anomaly in time because he works normally from 9 to 5, but now he's doing something at 9:30. So it's a time anomaly. And it's also what is known as a count anomaly because maybe he accesses just 5 files a day, but now he's accessing multiple documents. Maybe he's accessing 50 or 60 documents and modifying 50 or 60 documents, which is like a 10x increase to his normal behavior. Right? So now his risk score is increasing more, and as a security administrator at this point, you'd be investigating into his activities. Then at 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes later, Steve accesses a customer database and downloads data to a USB. Now this is definitely some kind of data exfiltration attempt because he's accessing a customer database and he's downloading the data onto his USB stick. And from a UEBA point of view, of course, Log360 or any UEBA solution would record this as a pattern anomaly as well as a time anomaly. Right? He's doing something that is not usual. Maybe he's never accessed this customer database in the past, and now it's for the first time ever at 9:45 in the night, he accesses that customer database and copies data to a USB stick, and it's potentially data exfiltration. Now, if you combine all of these three events, it becomes very clear that there's a 99.9% chance that this is a data exfiltration scenario. And at each point, you can see how machine learning and UEBA are able to track the user's activities and keep monitoring whether something is an anomaly or not, and keep increasing the risk score associated with that user. So the administrator can quickly go investigate and see, okay, why has this user's risk score been increased? The administrator can go and dive deep into the events that he did at 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., and 9:45 p.m. and verify that it was indeed a data exfiltration attempt. And even before this employee leaves office, you can go and nab the employee and prevent a data exfiltration attempt then and there. And so UEBA is very effective because a traditional SIEM solution might have struggled to detect this scenario effectively. Right? It might have thrown up too many alerts. Maybe it wouldn't have even detected that something was anomalous. Right? Maybe this engineer has access to the server, so he's just accessing something that he anyway has access to, right? But UEBA is able to make these distinctions, and it's able to use machine learning to spot that the events that Steve did at 9:30, and 9:45 were indeed anomalies, and it gives the administrator a very easy way of tracking this entire attack, maturing the incident, investigating the incident, and resolving the incident. Right. So I just wanted to talk about UEBA because it's something that is growing very popular today. Machine learning and AI is what we all talk about in technology today. And from a security, information, and event management point of view, it has a very crucial role to play. Right? It's a very practical application. It's a very practical application. It's a very practical application of machine learning in cybersecurity. And as you can see from this flow chart, when we talk about raising an alert, it can be done through the traditional correlation rules and augmented by machine learning. Right? So machine learning is able to spot the anomalies, and then you can raise an alarm, or you can use the traditional correlation and raise the alarm. Right? I'm not going to say or, I'm going to say you need to use both, because event correlation is great for detecting certain scenarios, and you need that to track certain types of threats. And machine learning is great for tracking certain kinds of anomalies. And combining the power of these two analytical techniques, you will be able to raise very precise alerts, and you'll be able to discover threats that might have been missed otherwise, right? And you can quickly respond and report, report, and resolve the incident. Right. So this is just to say that you need these advanced analytical techniques, right? Because there are two issues. One is that too many alerts get raised, and then it's like the admin doesn't know which was actually a concern and which was a false positive. And the other concern is that certain events get missed, cannot be discovered. That is, a solution may not be able to raise an alarm even though an actual attack is happening. Right? So using correlation and machine learning, you're able to reduce the alerting noise, so you get lesser number of alerts, and you also get alerts for certain threats that might have been missed otherwise, right? Especially using machine learning or UEBA. So correlation and machine learning go hand in hand. SIEM and UEBA go hand in hand. And the idea is a very simple idea that we started off in the beginning of raising the alert. That is the main objective, right? We want to get the alert when things go wrong. It could be as simple a situation as Ron getting added to domain admins in Active Directory. It could be a much more complex chain of events like a data exfiltration scenario that we saw. But the final end goal is that red box. We want the alert, and we want very precise alerts, and we want alerts for the advanced threats that are out there as well, right? And this is what organizations are struggling with, and this is what is a big challenge today, which is why it's a good time for you to rethink your security strategy. If you're not yet deploying a SIEM solution to its full functionality, now is a good time to turn your focus to SIEM incident detection and response, and see where you stand, and take the correct necessary steps to improve, right? So I just have listed out 8 functionalities of SIEM solutions, which according to me are the 8 main capabilities that you should have in your SIEM solution. And I've just assigned certain percentage numbers to each of these capabilities, to say that just in sort of increasing order of maturity. Right, so log collection and archival is a basic fundamental thing that you should do. And then to get more use of the collected logs, you look at reports and dashboards. So I've just marked that as, say, 35% of where you need to be. And then by implementing change auditing to track changes, you become more secure. And then by implementing real-time alerts, that helps you go a long way in detecting security incidents. And then leveraging more advanced features such as correlation, threat intelligence, security orchestration, which is to integrate your SIM solution with other tools in your IT, such as help desk tools, to make your process of resolution more efficient. And then machine learning, or UEBA, just keeps increasing your maturity level in SIM. Right? This is not any official analyst study, but this is just something that I roughly came up with just to give you an idea of what kind of features you need to be looking at in a SIM solution, and what kind of capabilities rather that you need to look at in terms of bettering your own SIM posture. Right? So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I just wanted to leave you again by saying that ManageEngine, we have Log360, which is a SIM solution that can address all of the problems that we discussed in today's webinar. And it has a UEBA add-on that was launched recently. So you have Log360 and Log360 UEBA, which is an add-on to Log360, which together can work to detect security threats and alert you, right? That all important alert and incident detection and response is what Log360 offers, right? It's a comprehensive SIM solution. Any questions that you have at this point, please reach out to us on the live chat. We just got I just saw a notice, we got a couple of people asking for the presentation, right? So we'll be sharing you the recording of the webinar and the presentation within a couple of days. So just stay tuned for that. We'll also be sharing you some other important resources. I'm being told that we'll be so that it'll help you with either if maybe you're evaluating Log360, or maybe you just want to learn more about SIM. We'll be able to give you all of that information as well. Right, so thank you so much for joining us. We're just getting a few questions coming in now. Some of these questions are more specific about the webinar, and some of you are asking about certain presentations, documentations, and material. We'll just be answering that in a minute or so. I just want to quickly wrap up the presentation by saying thank you for joining us today. I hope the presentation was useful. I hope you learned something that you didn't know prior to the webinar. Do take a moment at the end of the webinar, once you close the webinar, to just fill up the feedback and let us know what you like or didn't like, so that we can try to improve our future webinars. Tell us what topics you'd like to hear about, what you'd like to know more about, and we'll try to host webinars for those topics as well. Right, so apart from that, cheers. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to start answering all the questions one by one on the live chat. So just stick around for a couple of minutes in case your question hasn't been answered yet. So thank you so much and have a great day.